guys. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Let Go, Let God podcast. I'm your host, Erika Ray, and I'm super grateful that you decided to tune into this week's episode. It's going to be a good one, and we're going to be talking about conviction and judgment. So, before I get into it, I was outside the other day preparing some things and I was flipping through wondering whatever I was going to talk about for this week's episode. And there was a couple things that actually happened this week that led me to picking this topic. And so I kind of want to share those things and then I want to get into the different types of conviction and judgment, and I want to share some verses and all the goods so that you guys can be maybe a little bit more equipped to handle different convictions and different judgments on yourselves and other people. And when I say other people, I don't mean judging other people. I just say different judgments with the things that you're doing with other people and whatnot, because we live in a world where sometimes it's so hard to figure out what is right and what is wrong, because there are those clear black and white answers that we do have, but then there's so many gray areas, and that's where lots of prayer comes in, and that's where convictions and judgment can really help make those decisions of what's black and white, and it'll really help clear your mind on what the Lord wants for you. So, it started off this last week. I was having a spirituality conversation with my roommate, and we were talking about Christianity and Catholicism, and we were just talking about all these different things. And I personally felt convicted in the conversation because we were talking about so many different things. But at one point, I was sharing how the important thing for Christians to do is go out and preach the gospel and witness and share the good news, because whenever people are saved, they're going to go to heaven. And that's why the Lord stresses it so much to go and spread the good news. Because if the news didn't need to be spread and if everyone was going to go to heaven, then why would Jesus stress that point so much? And so that was one of the things that we talked about. But I felt a little bit convicted because I feel pretty confident in teaching and preaching and talking to people and all that good stuff. But when it comes to evangelism and witnessing, I honestly haven't done too much of it. And I really was like, wow, the Lord, I'm literally saying this to my roommate. I'm like, the Lord talks about how it is the most important thing to witness to others so that they can be saved and they can have the gift of eternal life and go to heaven. And I'm over here talking about all the things I'm learning, but preaching the good news is where the good stuff is at and where you got to start. And so I was really thinking about that conversation, and I was grateful that we had that conversation because it really opened my eyes up to what is important. And I think that in our everyday lives, we can get so caught up in the grind and the routine and the work and the kids and the family and the boyfriend and the husband and the wife and all the things. And I personally lose sight and focus on what is important. One of my prayers that I pray constantly is, Lord, show me the important things that I need to focus on for today and let me forget the rest. Because sometimes there's so many things on my to-do list and I get overwhelmed, and then I'm frozen and I don't do any of it because I'm too overwhelmed. And so going to God and asking Him, okay, Lord, please give me eyes to see what the productive, important kingdom things that it is that you have for me to do today. And that's been really helpful. So that conversation was really insightful for me. And actually, the day after, I was going to run errands and I was at the grocery store, and I walked out of the grocery store and there was this guy, and he asked me if I had any spare change, and I said, no, I don't, but are you hungry? And he was like, yeah. So I said, okay, let me go put my groceries in my car and then I'll come back. So I went back to meet this man, and then we went inside and we got some food, and then he left. And honestly, I don't do that kind of thing often. When it comes to people needing help, I really, really try to listen to what the Lord tells me. And if he compels me to give somebody money or buy someone food or do something for somebody, especially a stranger, I try to listen to that. But I also, honestly, being a woman out on the streets, I get a little bit nervous and am kind of paranoid. And I always have my guard up with people that I don't know just because I don't know what's going to happen and I want to be safe. And so that's where my prayer really comes in. And I'm like, okay, God, you got to speak to me loud if you want me to help this person. And I felt pretty comfortable doing that. So I left, got in my car. I'm driving home. Right when I got in my car, though, instantly, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to share Jesus with him. I need to share the gospel with him. And I had all these groceries in my car, things that needed to be refrigerated, but I felt this strong, heavy conviction to go talk to him about Jesus. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to drive home, drop my groceries off. And the whole way back, I was like, kept thinking about this man and I couldn't go on with my day. So I got home, dropped my groceries off, and I had told myself, okay, I have to go back. I have to go back and try to find this man because I have to tell him about Jesus. And is that really what I wanted to do? No. I had other things to do. I drove back home and then I was going to drive back over there during rush hour. It is really not what I wanted to do, but I felt this strong, heavy conviction to go and do that. So I drive back. I drive to the store. I don't see him outside, and then I'm like, okay, well, I don't see him, but I felt like he was there. And I felt like I needed to keep driving around. So I was driving around and I was praying, Lord, please let him be here if you want me to talk to him about you. Please don't let me leave this plaza unless you want me to talk to him if he's there. So I was driving around some more, and then I was about to give up, and I pull around the corner right by the ice cream shop, and sure enough, I see him. So I pull up, and then I get out of my car, and I call his name, and I'm like, hey, and then in my mind, I'm like, what am I even gonna say? And so I basically was like, hey, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I needed to come back and talk to you. And so he was like, okay. And then I asked him if he wanted to sit down, and we started talking. And I remember years ago, was this years ago? Yeah, years ago, I took this class on how to be a witness. And it's actually where I met my fiance. So shout out to that class and for so many other things. But it was talking about evangelism. And I remember in that class, they taught us how to be a good witness. And one of the first things that they taught us was to be curious. And so I just started to ask this guy a lot of questions. And thankfully, he was very kind and he made me feel very comfortable, and I also felt like the Lord gave me a lot of peace, but he was just so open to anything, and he wasn't standoffish or anything. He was like, yeah, let's talk. So I asked him about his life and all these different things. I asked him about his religious background, and he told me that he was kind of familiar with some things, but not really. And so I won't share all the details of the conversation, but I basically got curious and asked him lots of questions. And then when I felt right, I shared some personal things about my life. And then I talked about how the Lord totally transformed my life and how it has just been amazing ever since. And then we talked for a little bit, got to know him, and then I told him, okay, well, I want to offer you a couple things. One, I would love to pray for you. And I asked him what he was struggling with, and I told him I would love to pray for him. And then I told him I would love to walk him through the salvation prayer. And that it's pretty easy for me to pray for somebody, but walking them through the salvation prayer and bringing that up is I haven't done that often. I think when I was a little kid, I've done it, but I haven't really done that often. And you never know how somebody's going to respond. But I literally, I knew that if I did not say these things, I felt so strongly that I was going to be so disobedient to the Lord if I did not share these exact things with this man and ask to pray for him and pray the salvation prayer over him. I knew I was going to be disobedient, and I was like, I can't live with that for the rest of my life. So I have to do it. So anyways, I asked to pray for him. I asked to do the salvation prayer with him, and then I asked him if he wanted to come to church. And I was very grateful because he was so open. He's like, yeah, please pray for me. And so I didn't pray anything super crazy over him. I just prayed what I felt the Lord was telling me to pray for. And then I talked to him a little bit about the gospel and if he'd heard about it and if he believed it and all that stuff. And it was a really good conversation. And then I asked him if he wanted to accept Christ to come into his life and be his savior and guide him. And so he said yes. And then we prayed through that prayer together. And it was so cute because after the prayer, he was like, that's it? And I was like, yeah, you have eternal life with Jesus now, and he's going to guide you and he's going to help you. And he was like, wow, okay. Um, and so then I wrote down my church information and gave it to him. And I was like, I really hope to see you soon. I'll be praying for you. And he told me he'll be praying for me and my fiance. And he was just so nice. And we had such a great conversation. And I left being like, okay, whatever happens, Lord, I am so grateful that you gave me the courage to go and do that and be obedient first and foremost. Because, you know, when your parents tell you to do something when you're little and you don't do it, or you're being disobedient, and they come and maybe they yell at you and you're like, it's not responded very well. But when they come and they say, I'm just disappointed in you, that hurts like no other. The disappointment, no, I'm not about it. And I literally felt like the Lord was looking down on me, asking me, okay, are you going to walk the walk, because you talk the talk a lot about what you're doing. And honestly, I am so grateful that, again, I had the courage and the faith to do that. And I share that story because it was such a heavy conviction. My heart was pounding. I felt like I could not leave the presence of that plaza until I found this man. And I don't really get those feelings too often, but when I do, I know that they're from the Lord, and it's so cool because it's a holy encounter, and it's so cool. And in those moments, you trust that the Lord's going to give you the words to speak, which I actually have a verse written down about that, just in case you're thinking, okay, but if I do that, then what am I going to say? Am I going to sound weird? All this stuff. Maybe you might sound weird, you might sound crazy, the person might reject you, but wouldn't you rather deal with that rejection versus the disappointment from the Lord? Because I know I would. So there's a verse in the Bible, which I need to find it, and I wish I had it memorized, but there's a verse that talks about how the Holy Spirit will talk for you. And so that's just something that I always remember in those moments where if God leads you to it, he's going to see you through it, and the Spirit's going to work through you. And like I said, my prayer was nothing crazy or anything like that, but I felt so Spirit led, and I knew that I had to do my best in sharing that ministry. So that was a really cool experience, and it just got me into convictions. And so I want to share some things about personal convictions, because I think convictions and judgment in general can be looked at as such negative words, and I want them to be redefined as positive things, because when we have these convictions about personal things, whether we're doing something wrong or whether we're supposed to go and do something for the Lord, it's refinement, and it's making us so much better. And so we should actually be grateful whenever we're convicted. I remember that back years ago, I was doing a lot of things, and I was not convicted of the things that I was doing. I was doing things that I shouldn't be doing, and I did not feel the convictions. And then the closer that I got to the Lord, the more convicted I felt. And Let me tell you, it's really uncomfortable, and it kind of sucks when you get a conviction of something that maybe you've been doing for a while and you didn't really have that conviction, and you're like, oh man, I gotta stop doing that. Maybe you're listening to an artist you shouldn't be listening to, or watching a show, or hanging out with a friend, or something like that. And it's comfortable, it's what you've been doing for a while, but as you've been getting closer to Christ, He's refining you and He's telling you, yep, nope, I, I'm convicting you of that. And so you got to stop. And I think that it's such a beautiful thing. And I think that with the big mistake too that a lot of people make is when it comes to judgment. And I think it's so easy for us to judge other people for whenever they're doing something wrong. But the reason that we shouldn't judge other people, well, the Lord tells us not to, but one of the other reasons is because a lot of the times people don't know that they're doing anything wrong. And there is a verse that I want to share about that. This is Luke 23:34. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So intercede and pray for your friends because they might not know that what they're doing is a sin. A lot of the times, whenever I have conversations with people, especially friends, people close to me, and they're telling me about something that they're doing, I instantly can recognize that what they're doing is not serving the Lord, but I can truly tell that they don't see that. And so instead of condemning them for what they're doing or trying to convince them to do otherwise, I I will pray for them. And I pray, I'm like, Lord, please give them a conviction for this thing that they're doing and intercede because it's not of you, it's not getting them closer to you. And that own personal conviction is going to be the thing that moves you versus your friend or your mom or your dad telling you, hey, don't do that. Because I've been there, I've been in that same exact spot where people have been like, don't do that. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then when I was personally convicted, I was like, okay, I cannot be doing this. So I think that is a really big thing. And I think that prayer speaks louder than you actually telling them that they shouldn't be doing something. So I think that is a really big thing to remember, and kind of goes off of judgment too. And so Romans 14:10 says, "Why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or you, why do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God." So ultimately, we're all going to be judged. I think I've been thinking about this a lot, and whenever I'm debating on if I should do something, I think about, oh, I'm going to have to stand in front of the Lord one day, and do I want Him to replay this memory back of me? Probably not. And then other times I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be fine. So we're all going to be personally judged, and it's no place for us to judge our friends or judge other people. This verse reminds us that we're all imperfect and we're all on the same team as well. So let's build each other up, not push each other down. So let's not pass on judgment, because there's been so many times where I want to pass judgment on somebody, and I can tell you that I have been in their spot before and I was doing the same exact thing as them. And so that also brings me to, wouldn't you want the treatment on yourself that you wish you would have had back in the past? And I think about this so much, where I think about whenever I was living in the world and I was doing whatever I wanted to do, and I did have people who did this for me, but I just loved it so much whenever people could give me space and pray for me and always be there for me versus condemning me and treating me like I'm this terrible person or whatever. They're judging me, whatever they're going to think. And so treat others the way you want to be treated, and treat them with love, because you don't know what they're going through. Everyone is at a different stage in their life as well. So just remember that a lot of times you have to meet people where they're at, which that's another huge thing that is really helpful for whenever you're witnessing, is meet the person where they're at, get curious, and really try to get to know them for who they are, and just pray for all the things that you see they're struggling with, and pray that they see the Lord in all those things and that he helps them come clean about all the things that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. So that's a big thing with conviction as well. And another thing too I want to talk about is we all have our own personal convictions. So Romans 14, 1 through 12, Romans 14, 5 says, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his mind. This verse is saying that we should all act on our own convictions. And yes, like I said earlier, there are the black and white things that we should be doing and we shouldn't be doing, and those things should never be compromised. But sometimes there's the things that we're not too sure of. For example, you could talk about alcohol in this sense, and alcohol is not bad. Jesus drank wine in the Bible, but alcohol is bad for an alcoholic. And so if you are tempted in this area, then you know that you should most likely stay away from it, because the Lord says to stay away from temptation, because the enemy can get a foothold whenever you give into those tempting things. And so if someone is an alcoholic, maybe their personal conviction is to stay away from alcohol. I personally am very sensitive to things, and so I have to be very careful what my brain and my eyes consume. So I don't watch certain shows or movies. I don't listen to certain music, because whatever I'm putting in me is going to come out of me. And if I'm talking to you guys, I don't want anything that is not of the Lord coming out of me, and it's going to come out because I'm imperfect, but if I can try to avoid that as much as possible, that would be great. So remember that if you personally get convicted of something, it might not be a conviction that someone else has, and so you don't want to go and put that judgment on somebody else, because it's your conviction and that's between you and the Lord. And if you are struggling with how to figure out what that conviction is, I know I've been in this spot before, and something that's really helpful for me is if I'm doing something and I'm wondering if I should stop doing it. One, that's kind of a sign to stop doing it. If you have to even think about it, that kind of gives you your answer there. But if you're really not sure, and I've done this, I will take a break from it for a little bit. So if I'm watching a show and I'm feeling convicted about it, then I'll stop watching the show for a little bit and I'll pray about it. And if I feel like, oh yeah, that is not good for me, then I won't go back to it. But if I am watching some videos on social media and it's just fun things like different hairstyles or wedding stuff or recipes, and I don't feel like it's consuming my brain negatively, I'll take a step back from it, stop watching them for a little bit, and then I'll realize, oh, I can handle that. I can totally handle doing that. Versus being like, oh, okay, I can't go on social media at all because I'm going to see this and this and this. But it's really up to you and God. And my recommendations, things that have helped me, are to remove yourself from the situation and pray about it for a little bit. And then when you go back into it, you're going to feel very clearly what you should be doing. You're going to feel even more conviction towards it, or you might feel better and you might be able to be like, oh, that actually is not bothering me. So those are some things that I do to help me. And I just want to share, I think, one more thing. So back to the temptation thing, I just want to share another verse because this one is just a good reminder. Matthew 6:13 says, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." So pray that you will not be led into temptation. Matthew 26:41 also says, "Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Guys, we're so weak without the spirit. We I can't function on my own. There's days where I'm just like, I can't do it. I can't do it by myself. Lord, I need you. We are weak. And so we need to be stretching that muscle, stretching that muscle, building that muscle, and working it out, because we cannot do this life alone. And so we need to be working that out. We don't want to flirt with disaster. Pray that you'll stay away from temptation. If you are in a situation and you're a little bit weary about being in the situation, if you don't have to put yourself in it, I highly recommend you don't do it. But if you have to, pray fervently, have a friend pray for you, have an accountability partner, because I think that those are really big things. And so I hope that you guys got some good stuff out of this podcast. I wanted to share those stories that really hit home for me and just my personal experiences as well. I think that convictions and judgment on what to do and what not to do, again, are beautiful, beautiful things. And I think that they are a necessary part to becoming a mature Christian. And so if you've never thought about this before, start praying into it. Another prayer that I always pray is, Lord, please surgically remove anything in me that is not of you. Please give me eyes to see that. And it's a powerful prayer, because things do come up, and things will always come up because we are imperfect beings. And we will have to keep praying those prayers until we're in heaven one day and we're all perfect beings. But until then, we got to do it. And even though it may be hard in the moment, I promise you it gets so much better and it's so rewarding. And there's this song that I listen to. It's called Make Room. I forgot who it's by, but it is so special to me because it reminds me that we need to get rid of all the things that God doesn't have for us so that we can have room for the things that he does have for us. And the things that he does have for us are so much greater than the things that we think are best for ourselves. I don't want what I think is best for myself. I want whatever God thinks is best for me. And sometimes it's really hard to accept that. And it's really hard to accept whenever you're praying about something and then you feel like you're just really let down and you're disappointed because it's something that you've always wanted and the Lord hasn't granted you that. But it's a blessing in disguise. There's so many things that I've prayed for that I didn't get that I know have been such blessings, and there's a lot of things I have prayed for that I have gotten, and it's really cool whenever my desires and God's desires are lined up. That's another thing I always pray, that God will align my desires with his desires, because that's ultimately what I want, even if I don't know it in the moment. And there's going to be things too that I think that I want that I actually don't want and they aren't good for me. And so what do I know? I'm only human. So, anyways, now that's all I got for this week's episode. Stay tuned for next week's episode and make sure you like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the episode, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.